Donald Trump. How was he?
It was a really good meeting. We had dinner together.
Did you have a burger? Or steak? Doesn't he have steak?
He didn't have
meal?
steak on that occasion. He had chicken.
Trump is going to accept a visit from Keir Starmer. Keir's going to be trying to stick his tongue up Trump's anus, but Trump isn't going to be having any of that. Firstly, because Keir Starmer is about as relevant right now as Betamax, and secondly, because Trump knows where Keir Starmer has been, and that is all the way up Brokeback Mountain with Lord Ali. That's it. Batshit bonkers Britain.
Trump has just delivered the most brutal political strike Britain has seen in decades, and the fallout is tearing through Westminster like a hurricane. Within hours of his warning, panic gripped financial markets, King Charles shattered royal silence, and angry veterans poured into the streets demanding justice. What you are about to hear isn't just another political squabble. It's a crisis so explosive that it could end Keir Starmer's leadership and plunge Britain into chaos. This is the story of how a single message from Donald Trump has shaken the foundations of British politics and forced the King himself to step into the fire. It all began with a speech that Donald Trump delivered from his private estate, one that was broadcast live to millions around the world. His target was clear: Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Trump accused Starmer of betraying his own people by pouring taxpayer money into what he called luxury lifestyles for illegal migrants. The words were not measured, they were not diplomatic, they were designed to cut straight to the heart of Britain's political divide. He thundered that Starmer's government was silencing free speech, punishing American tech companies, and abandoning the very soldiers who once defended Britain's freedom. The response was immediate. Social media lit up with Trump's quotes, millions of shares and comments, pushing the story across every platform. Hashtags like Starmer betrayal and Hoyt veterans first surged within hours, climbing to the top of Twitter, Facebook and TikTok. For ordinary Britons already furious about rising costs and crumbling public services, Trump's words felt like a brutal confirmation of everything they suspected, that their Prime Minister was more interested in appeasing global elites than protecting his own people. But the scandal was not just about words. Days before Trump's speech, leaked documents revealed that Starmer's administration had quietly allocated over £1 billion to fund 4-star hotels for migrants who entered the UK illegally. These weren't modest hostels or temporary shelters. These were full-service hotels with spas, restaurants and seaside views. The images spread like wildfire online. Lavish buffet tables, swimming pools and private suites. At the same time, shocking photographs showed British war veterans sleeping in doorways, huddled under thin blankets outside fast food chains, their medals still pinned to their coats, as if clinging to a nation that had forgotten them. The moral contrast was unbearable. Citizens watched side-by-side videos of migrants enjoying hotel meals, while veterans, men and women who had served in Afghanistan, Iraq and beyond, were begging on the streets for food. The outrage was so visceral that even loyal Labour MPs struggled to defend the policy. One junior minister admitted privately that it looked like the government has abandoned its own heroes to reward those who broke the law. And then came Trump's hammer blow. In a primetime broadcast carried across America, he declared, "No nation that betrays its veterans can call itself strong. No leader who silences American voices will escape consequences." He warned that if Britain continued down this path, American companies would withdraw their investments, trade deals would collapse, and the so-called special relationship between Washington and London would be over. The financial markets reacted almost instantly. British tech stocks plunged as American investors pulled billions from London. Companies like Google and Microsoft began holding emergency meetings about relocating key operations to Ireland and Germany, safe from Britain's tightening digital laws. Within 48 hours, billions had been wiped off the UK economy. For a government already struggling with weak growth after Brexit, this was nothing short of catastrophic. But the true shock came from Buckingham Palace. For 70 years, the royal family has stayed silent on politics, maintaining the neutrality that is their shield against division. Yet at a charity gala for veterans, King Charles III delivered a speech that stunned the nation. His words were calm but devastating. "Those who have served this country with courage and honour deserve our care before all others. The emphasis was unmistakable. The king had drawn a line in the sand, publicly rebuking the government's migrant hotel policy and siding, however indirectly, with Trump's moral condemnation of Starmer. Royal insiders whispered that Charles had grown increasingly frustrated with the Prime Minister's refusal to act on veterans' homelessness. Reports surfaced that the king had even been using his private wealth to secretly fund emergency housing projects for former soldiers, a quiet act of defiance that exploded into the open with his speech. For the first time in living memory, Britain's monarch appeared to be siding with a foreign president against his own government. The political class was in shock. Some Labour MPs sat in stunned silence, unable to believe the king had broken his traditional role. Others were furious, accusing him of overstepping boundaries. But outside Westminster, the reaction was electric. Protesters gathered in Parliament Square, holding signs that read, "Homes for heroes, not hotels for migrants." Veterans in wheelchairs, many missing limbs from IED explosions, rolled through the crowds holding photographs of their fallen comrades. The chant grew louder each night. "Starmer out! Veterans first!" Police struggled to contain the demonstrations as thousands flooded the streets in London, Manchester and Birmingham. These were not fringe radicals, they were ordinary families, pensioners, veterans and middle-class citizens united in outrage. Videos of the protests went viral, showing veterans wrapped in Union Jacks while crowds cheered them on. For millions of Britons, the sight was heartbreaking and inspiring all at once, their heroes standing up against a government that had abandoned them. Inside Westminster, the pressure on Starmer became unbearable. Cabinet meetings dissolved into shouting matches, with ministers openly questioning whether the Prime Minister could survive. 3 junior ministers resigned in protest, while dozens of backbench Labour MPs began distancing themselves from the policy. Nigel Farage and Reform UK seized the moment, launching a Veterans First campaign that surged in the polls, drawing working-class voters away from Labour in droves. The crisis had only just begun, but already the signs of collapse were visible. Trump's words had set the spark, King Charles had poured fuel on the fire, and the people of Britain had taken to the streets. Keir Starmer found himself isolated, battered by foreign pressure, royal condemnation, economic turmoil, and a tidal wave of public rage. His leadership no longer looked strong, it looked doomed. As the protests swelled and the markets buckled, Britain found itself in the grip of a storm unlike anything in recent memory. The Prime Minister's office scrambled to contain the chaos, releasing carefully worded statements about balancing compassion with responsibility. But no statement, no press release, no polished words could erase the images flooding every screen. Decorated veterans sleeping on cold pavements while migrants lounged in hotel lobbies, sipping tea and scrolling on government-funded smartphones. The anger was not only on the streets, it was inside Parliament itself. During Prime Minister's questions, the opposition benches launched a coordinated assault. Conservative MPs, emboldened by the public mood, demanded answers. Sarah Henderson, holding up a photograph of James Patterson, the homeless Royal Marine whose story had shocked the nation, asked Starmer directly why his government funded seaside resorts for illegal migrants while Patterson slept outside a McDonald's. The chamber fell into an uneasy silence, the kind of silence that signalled moral outrage, cutting through political noise. Starmer's reply was stumbling, filled with pre-prepared phrases about systemic challenges and long-term solutions. But the words fell flat, MPs jeered. Even Labour backbenchers shifted uneasily, refusing to clap, refusing to defend what had become indefensible. Reporters later described the moment as the longest few minutes of Starmer's political career, a televised humiliation that revealed just how fragile his authority had become. Meanwhile, the financial world delivered another devastating blow. American investors, fearful of Trump's threats and Britain's uncertain trajectory, began moving billions of dollars out of London. Stock prices tumbled. Banks issued warnings. The Treasury admitted privately that the standoff with America could cost Britain hundreds of billions in lost investment. And it wasn't only America, Australia, Canada, and even the European Union started voicing concerns over Britain's digital censorship laws. Allies who once stood shoulder to shoulder with the UK were now questioning whether the country had lost its democratic compass. The sense of isolation grew daily. Foreign headlines painted a brutal picture. Britain betrays its heroes, Starmer's migrant crisis, and King Charles sides with veterans against PM. For a Prime Minister who had once promised stability after years of Brexit turmoil, this was a nightmare beyond imagination. His legitimacy was unravelling, not in slow whispers, but in screaming headlines across the globe. At the same time, the ground war inside Britain intensified. Social media movements multiplied overnight. A Facebook group called Veterans Before Migrants gained 500,000 members in less than 2 weeks. Telegram channels shared daily leaks of government spending figures, fueling anger with proof after proof of mismanagement. Viral videos showed split-screen comparisons. On one side, migrant hotels with fresh buffets and crisp sheets. On the other, veterans wrapped in sleeping bags under train stations. These videos weren't just emotional, they were devastating political weapons, impossible for Downing Street to counter. The protests escalated into daily marches. Westminster Bridge was shut down for 3 nights in a row as thousands gathered with banners and chants. Veterans in uniform joined the demonstrations, some wearing their medals, others carrying photographs of fallen comrades. Their message was simple and impossible to ignore. We served this country. Why has this country abandoned us? Police presence grew heavier, but officers were reluctant to confront the crowds. Many in uniform sympathised with the veterans. Quietly, some even told reporters they felt ashamed to be policing men and women who had once risked their lives for the nation. The standoff revealed a deeper fracture. The government was not only losing the people, it was losing the very institutions meant to uphold order. And looming above it all was the shadow of King Charles. His speech at the gala had triggered a wave of speculation. Would the monarch say more? Would he intervene again? Palace insiders claimed the king was furious that his remarks had been twisted into a political storm, but at the same time he was determined not to back down. His allies leaked stories about his private meetings with veterans, about personal donations to housing charities, about the quiet rage he felt watching those who served his country treated like second-class citizens. For Starmer, the optics were fatal. He was the Prime Minister portrayed as indifferent, detached, obsessed with migrants at the expense of his own heroes. Charles, by contrast, was cast as the compassionate monarch, the moral voice, the father of a forgotten generation. The comparison was brutal, and it played across every television screen, every newspaper, every social media feed. No amount of political spin could erase the image of the king standing with veterans while the Prime Minister stood alone. Nigel Farage sensed opportunity. Reform UK staged rallies under the banner Veterans First, drawing crowds that rivalled those of major parties. Farage's speeches echoed Trump's words, condemning Starmer for betraying Britain's heroes and demanding an immediate end to migrant hotel spending. Poll numbers shifted dramatically. Labour's once comfortable lead collapsed, while Reform UK surged by 8 points in a single week. For the first time, serious commentators began asking whether Labour could even hold on to power until the next election. The pressure inside Downing Street reached boiling point. Sources described ministers openly shouting at each other in cabinet meetings, some demanding Starmer reverse course immediately, others warning that any retreat would look like weakness. Leaks from these meetings only fueled the fire, feeding the perception of a government in total disarray, and even Starmer's closest allies whispered privately that his leadership might not survive the month. But the true danger was not just political, it was moral. When a Prime Minister finds himself condemned by a foreign president, rebuked by his own king, abandoned by his ministers, and despised by the people, the question is no longer about policy, it is about legitimacy. Could Keir Starmer still claim to lead Britain when the very foundations of authority had collapsed beneath his feet? The answer, whispered across Westminster corridors and shouted in the streets outside, was becoming clearer with every passing day by no. Every morning brought fresh headlines, fresh leaks, and fresh protests. What began as a single warning from Donald Trump had spiralled into the greatest political earthquake Britain had faced in a generation. For Keir Starmer, the pressure was relentless. Financial markets collapsing, veterans marching, ministers rebelling, and the king himself casting a shadow of judgment that could not be ignored. The crisis reached a breaking point when yet another leak hit the press. This time, internal memos showed the government planning to expand the migrant hotel programme, adding an additional £400 million in contracts to cover luxury accommodations. The documents contained chilling details: 5-star resorts in coastal towns, complete with gyms, pools, and round-the-clock concierge services. The leak landed like a grenade in the middle of Westminster. Within hours, the story was splashed across every front page. Starmer expands migrant hotels while veterans freeze. The backlash was immediate. Protesters swarmed outside Downing Street, their chants echoing across Whitehall. "Resign, Starmer! Resign!" Crowds grew so large that police were forced to erect barriers around Parliament itself. Veterans in uniform stood at the front lines holding up their medals, arsols as a silent rebuke. Videos of amputees in wheelchairs being cheered by thousands went viral, spreading across the world as a symbol of moral clarity against government betrayal. Inside the House of Commons, Starmer's authority disintegrated in real time. Senior Labour MPs openly demanded a reversal of the policy. Some even hinted that if the Prime Minister would not step down voluntarily, the party would have to find a way to replace him. The whispers of rebellion turned into a roar. For the first time since he entered number 10, Keir Starmer faced not only the fury of the opposition, but the mutiny of his own side. Meanwhile, Trump doubled down. In another televised address, he declared that Britain had become a cautionary tale for the West, a nation so blinded by ideology that it had abandoned its warriors. He warned that unless Starmer resigned and Britain changed course, America would suspend all trade negotiations indefinitely. His words were not just aimed at the Prime Minister, they were aimed at the British people, urging them to reclaim their country before it was too late. And then came the final hammer blow from King Charles himself. At a remembrance service attended by thousands of veterans and broadcast live to the nation, the King spoke again. His voice was solemn, deliberate, and devastating. This country owes its freedom to those who served with courage and sacrifice. They must never be forgotten, never abandoned, never left behind. He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd of veterans in wheelchairs, their medals glinting in the autumn sun. The silence that followed was more powerful than any speech because the message was clear. The King stood with the veterans, not with the government. The effect was electric. Social media exploded. News outlets called it the most significant royal intervention in modern history. Analysts declared that Starmer's government had entered terminal decline. Within hours, rumours spread of resignation letters being drafted in Downing Street. By the end of the week, Starmer's position was untenable. His ministers had deserted him, his party was fractured, the public was in open revolt, and both a foreign president and his own monarch had stripped him of moral authority. The once powerful Prime Minister now looked like a man clinging desperately to an office that no longer belonged to him. The collapse was complete. Britain watched as its leader, who once promised stability and fairness, became the symbol of betrayal and weakness. The crisis would be studied for decades, not as a clash of policy, but as the moment when a government lost its moral compass, when the loyalty of veterans outweighed the calculations of politics, and when the people themselves forced history to turn. Trump had thrown the first punch. King Charles had delivered the final word. And Keir Starmer was left standing in the ruins of his own making, humiliated before his nation and the world. The question now was no longer about one Prime Minister, it was about the future of Britain itself. Would the country rise from this humiliation stronger, guided by the principle of veterans first? Or had the damage already been done, leaving Britain weakened, divided and adrift on the world stage? One thing was certain: The political order had been shattered, and history would remember this moment as the day a foreign president and a British king together exposed the fragility of a prime minister who had lost touch with his people. Starmer's legacy was sealed, not as a leader of strength, but as the man who betrayed Britain's heroes and paid the ultimate price.